Welcome to Access to Analytics, the show where we discuss everything data and access to data.
Hi, welcome to a new episode of Access to Analytics with your host, Wannes Raziers. Today, I'm honored to have Max Schultze with me, one that everyone might know as the guy with the yellow costume, previously at Zalando. He's no longer there, but I'll let him introduce himself. Max, welcome.
Thank you so much for bringing me on the podcast today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm Max. I am, as one has mentioned, I have actually been working for quite a while, for more than 7 years at Zalando, on the side of the data platform, deeply involved into building all sorts of topics around like how data was produced, used, and also transformed across the whole organization, and also accessed, of course. For the past 6 months, a bit more than that already, actually, I've been over at HelloFresh. And I'm very happy because here I'm now currently working as an associate director of data engineering, again on the data platform. Here my responsibilities fall mostly into the direction of, helping the company to set up things around data infrastructure, but also a lot of tooling around how data is used, how data is transformed, how data is accessed, and how insights are generally generated from data, and to ensure that the organization has the right tools in place and that people have the right knowledge to actually use those tools to the maximum advantage for the use cases they have.
Well, thank you, Max. I think with such a background, you have some amazing insights to share with all of us. I think if you look to Zalando and HelloFresh, both larger companies, very customer-facing, you must have seen quite a lot of interesting data analytics or data use cases in general, I guess. Are there any you can share with us?
Well, there's plenty out there. And I think like one of the most interesting ones is usually coming from an angle of like what you would say like the most obvious one, which is sales analytics. Right, so that's usually one of the biggest use cases that you have like across any organization, because ultimately when you're selling any products or subscriptions or anything like that, at the end of the month you want to understand how much money you actually made, right? And in many different cases, you don't only want to understand that from an analytical perspective, but you also want to combine that information with pretty much anything else that you have out there. Yeah, like be it understanding sales information in combination with marketing efforts that you have spent, right? So that you can actually understand where your marketing efforts have been most efficient and most successful. Be it coming from an area of how the customers are interacting with your webpage, what are articles that are selling good, they are selling bad. Also for logistical forecasting, for instance, right? So like it goes in all different types of directions when it comes to working with data. In one way or the other, all of that is always brought back and correlated to the big dollar sign when it comes to actually how much they drive the value for the organization as a whole.
Yeah, when you were talking about the first use case, the sales analytics, I was thinking maybe he goes to quite a high level view on data. This is the figures we have per month. But if you start talking on making sure that you understand what drives people and connecting to web behavior and marketing campaigns and stuff like that, I'm assuming you connect data at a quite low level, low granular level, probably on customer level.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Like it always depends, right? Like there are certain cases where it definitely makes sense to connect these things on customer level. Like for instance, customer behavior is usually the biggest ones, and like how that is driven also by the offering of such an organization. While at the same time, of course, there are many different aspects to that as well. Like for instance, article information, right? Like if I'm thinking back at some of the things I'm from Zalando as well, there was always like quite some interest in making sure how the sales actually correlate with what's going on the logistics side or something like this, right? But also completely different angles when you think about things like payments, right? When you actually translate your order processing, your income back to what payment providers were actually chosen the most, and what are the ones that you should offer more, that it also can vary very much like from region to region, and then you can get like a lot of insights as well out of that that allow you to steer where you want to invest more and where you want to drive also your feature development in the future.
Actually, already mentioned quite a lot of the departments, probably of both companies, working for sales, for marketing, for logistics, and probably I forgot some. Have you seen some departments that are often underdeveloped in data, that are still sitting a bit more beyond?
Wouldn't necessarily say that it's certain departments or business domains that are like running ahead or lagging behind, for that matter. It's often more that business domains usually have all different kinds when it comes to data maturity, right? Like, and usually you have like teams that are more on the end of business analytics and decision making. They are usually the ones that are like much more data savvy, that are looking into the latest tools that are being offered, that are trying to get like the latest information really to generate the insights from the data and to drive decision making. Whereas then you have others that are like much more closer to, let's say, the day-to-day operations, that then are more closer to where the data is originally generated, but not so close on where the data is then actually used on a historic scale, and thus don't have like direct incentivation to really like be like on the edge in terms of using the latest tooling or having like the biggest interest in like how the data is leveraged after.
Of course, know a bit about your background, having talked a lot about data mesh and stuff like that. Do I need to translate this as in, if you look to data producers, then it's quite often not yet that mature in reusing their own data, but if you look more downstream to data consumers, so with the end data product with maybe a customer impact in mind, that's where the maturity resides, where the demand for new technology resides and stuff like that?
Very much so, and not just the demand for, let's say, new technologies, but also generally the demand for clean data, right? Like really pushing for data quality, like across the end-to-end delivery chain of data. That is usually driven from the people that sit at the very end of the chain, that are the ones who need clean and good quality data to make decisions, and who also suffer the most if there are issues that are coming from further upstream in the pipeline. And this is usually what you also see. And like, as you mentioned, I'm lucky enough to have been in two companies that have both embarked on the data mesh journey to address this on a larger organizational scale, which is really, really interesting to compare that as well. And what you can then really see is like the more organizations mature, the more you see how this, like, let me call it data savviness, pushes more upstream and interests and sparks more interest, like on the side of the people who are already further up on the chain of actually providing this data, ensuring that we have good quality, and in the end also investing into the things that are potentially not even used by themselves, but again, to develop like a bit of a product mindset, to provide data as a product for the people further down in different parts of the organization that are then actually generating the value from having that data available.
That's one of the largest challenges to mature your company, that often where data will be used and valorized is not really the place where it's produced and productionized internally. So there's kind of a tension that you need to provide your data for others to actually make value out of it.
Funnily enough, that is usually the biggest challenge that you have. Yes. And why do I say funnily? Because when I'm thinking about like that, I'm offering a service that is of use to somebody else within the same organization, that concept is not new, right? Like that's basically what we've been doing in software engineering, like for like 1 or 2 decades now. Like internally, I'm providing a service that has a certain purpose, that either is directly customer facing. Of course, that is the best, because then you have like you can directly feel the impact of the things that you're actually doing, or you provide services that are used by other teams within the company, right? If you have certain services that are living like more on the back end side in terms of like order management or logistics or something like this, no customers directly interacting with your services, but again, you're offering services that are used by other teams or even other services, and then translating that same thinking into data, somehow there's always a blockage that does not click, right? And this is like really one of the tough parts to take the same thinking that we already have and say, well, why not just do the same thing for data, right? I'm offering a service for others that's like my product that I'm building, that I'm offering, that others are generating value from. I'm also offering data for others to generate value from. So I should treat it exactly the same way. I should treat it as a product, and I should care about the stakeholders, because ultimately it's not like teams individually who are like entirely covering the value chain of an organization. It's usually the organization as a whole, right? Like we are all in the same boat. Like I am building something for you that you are then using to do something else. Like as a data platform person, I have never been directly part of the value chain, right? We're just quote unquote building tools. Yeah, we are just allowing others to do a more efficient job in what they are doing, but they are the ones that are then actually generating the value for the organization. By allowing others to be more efficient, of course, I'm indirectly contributing to their success as well. But this is something that people need to acknowledge first. And like having everybody sit in the same boat and acknowledging that this is really like a group effort where everybody's playing together, that is, I think, like the state that we need to get to in terms of maturing the organization.
To my own background, I can really relate to this. I've worked at a media company, and indeed there as well, you need to build upon certain data products to actually get some value out of it. And if you start working on personalized content or personalized advertising, directly customer facing, then people are quite often willing to do so. Yet whereas if you were giving the example of logistics, if you're working on making sure that you can optimize your distribution center or something like this, which is very valuable for the company as well, it's often way harder to get this mindset in there to manage this data, because it's not this cool of a use case you're collaborating to. So that's also something that I've seen. Whereas weirdly enough, the one where everyone's willing to work on contains quite a lot of customer data because it has direct customer impact. So the risk is way higher than actually working on your distribution center. Have you seen certain differences there in how people cope with certain sensitivity of data?
That is, of course, always like a very delicate topic when it comes to like how customer data is used across an organization, especially when it comes to coming from an angle where you might still have like some let's say more rigid data practices, in the sense of you rather make a copy instead of like trusting on data like where it directly is, because technical integrations are difficult and the tooling might not be as advanced yet. And then you end up with like various different copies of your customer data. And then when you try to actually sort that out again, when you're looking at topics like data privacy, right? I've been very, very active over the past like 4 or 5 years now, and like building solutions for topics like GDPR, right? Like customer data deletion, like right to be forgotten, and these kind of things. And all that always starts with first understanding what do you actually have. And that usually triggers a massive cleanup operation across the whole organization. And because of that, in many cases, the customer data space is usually the one that gets sorted out the earliest, because it is attached to a giant risk. Because let's be honest, organizations don't want to pay millions of fines.
Oh, no, I can imagine. And you were previously also mentioning you've already dropped the word the purpose, and I guess that's here relevant as well. So during your cleanup action, that you really try to understand, why do we have this data, what are we doing with it, and what's the end value. So I guess that's often a process that takes quite a while to clean up everything in a company, or maybe you even never reach the end state.
Absolutely. And I love to stay on the GDPR example, to be honest. Again, like I personally think it's a super, super interesting topic. On the one hand side, is very interesting from a technical challenge in terms of what do you actually need to set up across the organization. But again, like when you are the one who's driving GDPR processes within the organization, you always have a second agenda that pushes the company towards the direction of cleanup. right? Like of really understanding what you have. And because all of a sudden, for once, you are actually the one that has like the big legal stick in your hand, and that it is allowed to drive something with like full force into the organization that everybody technically knows you should be doing anyways, but that so far just hasn't become a priority for anybody else. Right. And because of that, like I love to be in that situation, and I love to drive that topic because it leads to the greater good in the organization, not just from an angle of like building trust with our customers and allowing them to fully understand that their data is well protected on how we are doing it as well, but to exactly know what you have where, and then also be able to apply like certain rules to that, of course, in terms of cleanup, but also in terms of who actually is allowed to see what.
Yeah. You were referring to yourself, I guess, as the one with the legal stick in this case. Who are you chasing? Who do you see responsible for this cleanup?
Everyone. Yeah. So this is like really like where everybody needs to pick up their part of the responsibility to get to a clean state ultimately in the end, right? And this goes like all the way from the people that are actually using customer data on a day-to-day basis, because they have very valid use cases in terms of doing so, and not like simply blocking them from like doing their work, doing their job, but instead like providing them the right tooling to get the job done, also in an easy way in terms of like understanding and documenting the access around that, all the way down to the value chain, like where the data is originally produced, to ensure that they are not these type of shallow copies that I mentioned earlier, right? That using the data is so easy that nobody has a need to spark things up that are like shadow IT and that they're sitting completely outside of your control. And this is like, again, like me from a platform perspective, always one of the big topics that I also try to push, convincing people to use your tooling because of convenience, because you want to actually make all these things so simple that they want to use it voluntarily, and then you don't even have to force them anymore, because choosing any alternative way would either hit legal boundaries, and that's where the stick comes out again, or go to the part that they build something on their own, where they then quickly realize that building it on their own is so much more complicated and has so much more effort that they ultimately end up back on the tooling that you are providing anyways.
I think you're getting in a very interesting topic here. It's like balancing the one with the stick and the one with the convenience, making sure that you can kind of do everything, which of course is also not really what you want to get into, because people need to think about the purpose they're having for what they're actually doing for it. But how do you balance this with your end users? It's first convenience, or it's convenience about everything with regulatory, or how do you see this actually getting on?
Generally speaking, I always aim to build in compliance processes by design, right? So that if it comes to, for instance, requesting access to compute resources for data processing, that part of that request immediately comes in with a very easy way of saying, okay, this is the data that I actually need access to, this is the purpose for which I actually need that, and this is the type of compute that I need to get my job done. Something like this, right? Yeah. If you have that automatically baked in, and instead of like needing people to like chase down and open Jira tickets and what have you back and forth, and then taking months for somebody to actually finally get access to the data that they need, if all that is built into the default processes, then the entry barrier is like much lower, and then again, because it's convenient, the people use the right processes by design, because there is no need to follow up on anything else, right? And that's basically where the legal stick, you just like bind a carrot on front of that, and then you have like some very good incentivization for the people.
Assuming it helps to have a clear process that everyone knows what to do, probably also a full audit trail of what happens, so that you're also safe, and from there on you can actually move forward.
Yeah, and audit trail, like glad you brought it up. Super important to pair up with that, right? Because it's not only about like documenting what are the use cases, but sometimes you also actually have audits, and you need to prove that like the access that has been granted to different things, that is actually valid requests, right? And for that, you need to have that documentation. You need to have the right things in place, so that even somebody that comes in from the outside, or even if it's just an internal audit, you need to be fully able to showcase that everything that is going on in the organization has a purpose and makes sense.
Going back to the same question I already had, who's responsible? Because you were stating you have a request where you need to know which data you need, which processing power you want, and for which purpose. But who gets this request? Who needs to approve this? What's an ideal process afterwards?
So drives me a little bit towards the direction of like where I would like to be everywhere, and that is coming from two perspectives, right? Like on the one hand side, of course, the person who wants to get access to the data, they are the ones that actually need to file the request, so to say. And doing so should be as simple as possible and should like not take any effort whatsoever, because you're provided with the right toolings to actually get there. How that is then later on validated. On the one hand side, of course, you need to involve the different business domains that actually own the different parts of the data that people want to get access to. But you don't want to involve them in the sense that now they are the ones that need to go over every single request and need to put like a yes or no, or escalate that somewhere, or give temporary access, or whatever workarounds people come up with. But they are the ones who should define the rules on how access should be granted. And what do I mean with that? It's something like, okay, you define things no longer on an individual level on why somebody needs access to something, but it's more coming in from a level, okay, we have use case X in our organization. Let's say customer behavior analytics in combination with sales, right? As we discussed about that earlier. So this is a use case that we have. And now we say for that particular use case, there's on the one hand side a particular team that is working on that, and it can be one team, two teams, a whole department, multiple different teams across the whole organization. And then there's certain data that is attached to that use case, right? So you would need to get the access to customer information, maybe to clickstream data when it comes to the customer behavior, but also to the sales information, which is also a type of sensitive information, of course, which is financial information, which also not everybody can see across an organization. And now basically you have a package where you say that use case exists, and there's teams, and then there's data that is attached to that. And now if a new person joins one of those teams, they don't need to go through the whole process anymore, because per default, by joining that team, that means they are also working on that use case. And then per default, just by policy, they can get access to the same data that their colleagues are already using. And you like completely like cut short the usually very tedious and very manual process of like clicking through approvals one by one for each individual.
Previous recording, I believe it was with Jan Meskes, he was stating this as an ideal state as well, but then referring, and then later on people start moving teams. Of course, you're a bit depending on how correct all metadata from your users is and whether they're in groups or something else. Is this something you've encountered, that people stick with access they should have lost already?
Definitely. Like, as I mentioned, right, that was also my ideal state. So like reality is usually much more dirty when it comes to that. That like people move teams, yet still they retain certain access that they have from before, because you don't have like the right revocation processes in place. But this is again, like when we go back to the ideal state, of course, that's not only for granting, it's also for revoking. Right. So like the moment you move internally to another team, that means you're leaving one group and you're joining another. And with the action of leaving one group, that also means you lose all the access that is related to that. Right. Maybe there needs to be like some handover periods for like 2 more months you stay in that group before you actually get revoked. But that should, again, be automatically driven by policies, so that you might still be able to, like, I don't know, help out a colleague from your previous team during the first 2 months that you've moved over or something like that. Probably makes sense to have like a bit more flexible boundaries, let's say. But also that should be driven by policy. right? Where you basically say 2 months after I've left the group, I should like get revoked all the access that belongs to that group. And with joining the new group, I already automatically got all the access that is actually related to that group.
You were talking about quite a lot of people need to use data. You had examples of use cases closely throughout your entire company, I guess. And now you're talking about the ideal state, that everything should be quite easy. And if I hear you talking, you really live it. You're close to there, I have the feeling. But then you're dropping, of course, the real world is a bit more dirty. So what's happening? What withholds you from actually getting there?
I've seen many different processes come to life and die throughout the time that I've been working in the data space. And I also have to fully admit, like I don't even have like all the details yet when it comes to, for instance, like processes that are set up at HelloFresh. So that's something where I cannot even like share all the details at the moment. But even looking back, there have been clearly situations where at some point there was like something that was company-wide introduced, where there was a central security team that was responsible for answering on all of those requests, and they were given like on a single individual to single data set level, right? And sure, there could be like grouping, but ultimately it always boiled down to one-to-one access ultimately, right? And those type of processes perfectly made sense when they were put in place. When the data lake was like 20 data sets, and when you had like 10 users that were trying it out as a beta, more or less. But once that grew towards like tens of thousands of data sets and thousands of users, and then you still have the same process in place, that of course like entirely breaks the organization, right? Like you hit bottlenecks left and right. People just cannot get access to the data anymore. And then comes the whole process of like starting a transformation. Right. And that, of course, takes time. And I think that is usually like the biggest thing that holds everybody back from getting to the ideal state is time. Right. You need to put in the efforts. You need to make a good plan. You need to understand where you are at and where you want to go. Do the gap analysis and like actually take one step at a time to get closer to that. And that takes a long time and a lot of effort. Right. And like these type of like those are usually like transformation processes because they touch the whole organization, and you have all the legacy to deal with as well. Right. Like you need to also figure out like what are the things that people have already gotten granted access, so that even if you switch over to your new system from one day to another, not all of a sudden everybody has dropped everything that they need for their day-to-day work. Right. So like that is usually like the biggest thing that keeps you away from really getting there is either not understanding really where you want to go. That's usually the bad side of things, because that means you haven't even started thinking about it yet, or coming in from an angle of saying, okay, I know already where I want to go, and I know where I am, and I know what I need to do to actually get there, but then those are projects that usually take a lot of time and effort.
If I summarize, I think what you're stating as well is if you scale your data literacy, if you increase your data literacy throughout your company, then suddenly what you had in place in the beginning is not sufficient anymore. So you also need to scale your data platform's maturity. Having experience with that on two companies, at least seeing it now as also at HelloFresh, but probably having encountered the entire process at Zalando, are there any things you would do earlier in the process? Assuming you can have kind of a greenfield project, starting a new data lake, what would be the first stuff you're doing now?
One of the biggest things, and that's like a thought that even having already like advocated data mesh for quite a while, came to me quite a bit later, is to also see the data platform as a product. Right, that you're not just everybody's always talking about data products and how you should like offer data as if it were a physical product, so that other can build up on top of that, and you give guarantees and you care for the user experience. Especially the last part, caring for the user experience, that is something that any data platform out there also has to absolutely do. And this is like really coming from an angle of saying that you need to understand like what are the main needs and what are the most important points that you should focus on. And that really goes down to the point of understanding the user journey and understanding where are the biggest pain points that you should address. right? And when I look back specifically on the topic of access control in my previous endeavor, that is something that we probably should have recognized way earlier. That is probably something where, again, the moment the process was originally set up, it perfectly made sense because we were looking at a rather small scale, but that scale got outgrown rather quickly over the years. And then coming to a conclusion early that we need an efficient process that automates all of these things, and then also striving for an efficient organizational setup on how to actually get there, that is something where I think like a lot of improvement could have happened.
I can admit I've encountered the same issue. I also am a firm believer of the data mesh, and I've been talking quite a lot about it. And again, one thing that also strikes me really late in the process is indeed that your data platform should be considered a product as well. I was even as naive as to say that the platform can be a shared responsibility of all data engineers in every... It doesn't work. There's a bunch of things you need to offer to your end users, to your data engineers, your data scientists, analysts, your business data owners. They're all quite different, and depending on the use case, there's a different people driving it. It's from a security compliance point of view, it's from a usability point of view. So I think indeed that's a very valid remark you made there.
I want to get to the point that people are only thinking about the actual use cases that they are working on, and they don't need to spend 80% of their time setting up infrastructure, debugging their orchestration frameworks, like all these kind of like figuring out how to get access to data, figuring out what data to use in the first place. Like all these kind of things are issues that the data platform should encapsulate for the user so that they have a clean user journey. And that's something that we are also currently like very, very actively working on, is to make the platform tooling as easily usable for all sorts of users across the organization that need to work with data. And that is not only for data engineers, right? Like we really want to and are working on simplifying everything that people are interacting with in terms of working with data, so that even an analyst just with like a couple of clicks and a couple of config files can build an entire data pipeline and bring that to production, so that not every part of the business needs to have a data engineer to actually get started with data. Because let's be honest, like we have like a bunch of smaller markets as well, right? Where maybe you only have like a single analyst that is supporting like an entire country while something is being rolled out. And they simply don't even have the capacity or the resources yet to like hire a data engineer to jump deep into the technical parts, right? And like acknowledging that and acknowledging also that there's way more analysts in your organization than there's data engineers, and like taking those as your target group, that is like where you can really like ingrain the product thinking for the platform as well, and really make your platform so simple that everybody wants to love and absolutely loves using.
Those are great insights, Max, thinking about who's the end user. Probably not only the data engineer, because there's many more data analysts who can work with data, and enabling them that if they have a new ID, a new purpose, my new use case, that I can discover which data is there, that I know how can I get access to it, that I can easily have the infrastructure to build a new use case and to really rapidly evolve with new use cases. And that's indeed where I believe your data maturity is growing. And if you can do that at a certain scale, like the companies like HelloFresh, I believe that's an immense addition to the company, a value add you bring.
Absolutely. And this is like really where also being able to measure that and being able to track the value that you're bringing to the organization is like absolute key, right? And that comes with the same product thinking as well, right? Like the CDO that I was talking to recently brought up the great sentence, "Whatever I can't measure doesn't exist." And of course, the platform also provides value. Right. And I mentioned earlier, we are like the back end of the back end of the back end. And we are not directly interacting with the customers. Thus, it's really hard to measure like where your impact is actually coming from. but there is clearly an impact, and you can measure that when you go into understanding the efficiency gains that you bring across the organization, understanding the cost savings that you bring across the organization, and just like making things easier and simpler and more compliant in terms of like using and working with data.
Very insightful. You've talked about getting data across the entire organization, simplifying stuff, your ideal end state, and of course as well the honesty, what is withholding you. Are there any final remarks you're thinking of? This I should really share as well about the journeys I've had. Valuable insights for everyone.
I think like one big hint that I can give everyone is like much going into direction of saying, understand where you are at today, right? Like be honest with yourself and do like a really honest self-assessment in terms of what are the challenges that you're currently facing. And as you so greatly said, what is holding you back on improving on those things? Because only when you understand like where do you actually honestly stand, and then paint a target picture on where you want to go, then you can really do like a gap analysis, and then you can really figure out what should be the next steps in your personal journey. And I think this is like where most of the organizations right now are more in the limbo state of like not really knowing, but also not putting in the efforts to learn. And this is like really like my biggest advice that I can give to everyone. Understand where you actually at, put in the time and the efforts to make an honest self-assessment, and then understand what actually holds you back to get to your target state.
Most often I try to summarize at the end of a podcast recording, but I think I cannot say anything better than this end, Max. I think this is a valuable lesson for everyone. So for me, it's just time to thank you for such insights, and I hope you will keep sharing your knowledge across. I'm quite certain you will do, and we will see you quite often on podcasts, on stage, and wherever.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure, and always happy to share some thoughts and share some insights with a bigger audience.
Perfect. Thanks, Max.
Thank you.